Welcome to Business Agility and Adapting to Change with SAFe 5.0. Jason Tanner and I are really happy you could join us today, and we're very happy to introduce Luke Hohmann. Luke was the founder and CEO of Contenio, which is the creator of the Weave platform, which is now SAFe Collaborate. He's also a SAFe Framework contributor and principal consultant. We're super happy to have Luke talk with us today, and I'm really happy that Jason Tanner was able to join as well. Jason is our CEO, and Jason, why don't you say a quick hello as well, and then we'll let Luke take the floor.
Hey, good to be here. Good to see everyone joining. And I actually was cleaning out my office. I found my SAFe 2.3 card from when I became an SVP. So I'm looking forward to hearing everything that's new.
Well, hi, everyone. And it's a good thing that Jason and Laura are like long and dear friends, because I'm not going to tell you everything that's new. There's too much. But I am going to focus on some of the highlights. And I would like to say to everyone, thank you so much for sharing some of your time with me. I know that in the current pandemic, we are all fatigued from Zoom meetings or WebEx meetings or Google Hangouts, and we long for being together and just the stuff that happens when you're at a conference. I'm a former board member of the Agile Alliance, and it was really sad to see that the Agile Alliance had to cancel this year. So my heart kind of goes out for the Agile community. It goes out for all of us, because I know that as Agilists, we really believe in being together. And so I'd just like to say thank you for everyone being here or listening. Let's get started. One of the most interesting things about SAFe is that it's a framework that is intended to evolve. Jason talked about his past, but SAFe has gone through many evolutions and it's gone through many improvements over the years. And the latest release is SAFe 5.0, and it's a release that we really focused on the concept of business agility. We think that there's some really interesting things that are happening that are seismic shifts. I know Mick Kirsten, I consider him a friend. I would definitely recommend his book, Project to Product. And there are other books out there that are kind of talking about this. I don't think Mick's the only book, but I think Mick's book is really kind of interesting because the way he frames it from the perspective of economics, but more importantly, Mick leverages some of the work of Carlota Perez, who talks about major technological revolutions. And there's a couple of things to notice about this slide, is that in every major technological revolution, there are a few provable kind of consistent patterns. There's the installation period, there's a turning point, and there's a deployment period. And it's in that turning point in which organizations either adapt or die. And that sounds pretty harsh, but it's extremely clear that if you're not adapting in the age of the digital internet, if you're not looking at what you can do digitally, you're going to die. There is a tremendous amount of opportunity, but it's pretty clear that we are right in the middle of this. And you could argue about where we are in the curve. You could say that the turning point, and if you notice at the turning point, sometimes the turning point was perceived to be a little bit longer and sometimes a little bit shorter, but you could argue that we are, still in the midst of our present turning point. Now, if you look at the details of some of these changes, you get to the installation period, right? And then turning point, but then the deployment period. And I really want to talk about that. That's the production capital of the new technological giants, and they start to take over. Now, these new tech giants are occurring in really interesting ways. BMW, and I can tell everyone that BMW is one of the companies that I have worked with directly, And their CEO looks to say more than half of its R&D staff will be software developers. And so that turning point is not just hardware, it's digital. It is cyber physical systems. It is software systems. We know Amazon and Whole Foods merged. It's kind of a little bit of old news. The market cap of Tesla, this slide is dated, and it's actually even more. And if you look at what Tesla did, they sometimes talk about the Tesla being a rolling computer. And I thought this one was really shocking to me when I heard Mick talk about Apple went from not producing watches to the biggest watchmaker in the world. That's pretty remarkable when you consider the history of watches and wristwatches, and what you may think of, watches ranging from the ultra expensive brands to the relatively inexpensive brands. But now we've got Apple. And why? Because it's a digitally enabled physical tool, cyber physical system that enables us to do more things than we could ever imagine, because that watch is part of our ecosystem of the Apple product line. Now, to compete in the age of software is that we have to make sure that we're using the right frameworks and infrastructure models. Now, this is where my past as a geek will probably start to come through. And when Dean talks about this, or other people talk about it, they're going to emphasize different activities or different aspects. But for me, this is things like, CI/CD. I started my career before PCs really took off, right? I was pulling cable underneath raised floor for mainframes. And I remember having my first luggable computer, which was a portable personal computer with a screen that was about 10 inches across, that was a green screen MS-DOS. And to now where if you can see my picture, I'm carrying, an iPhone, which has more compute power than you can kind of imagine. And so when you look at this infrastructure and you look at this model, it was built in different ways, both managerial and technical. Now, we're also going to look at some of the ways in which we can adapt to business agility by looking at how, as an organization, if we're supposed to make this change, well, how do we do this when we have an existing organization, or if our company is a big company, how do we do this? Well, let's look at how most organizations start. We start with a network. And when I say start, I mean relatively small companies. And that network is focused on solving a problem. And SAFe, this is associated with the Agile product delivery competency, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. And that customer with that problem is our focus. And so we have a network of people who are working. Now, as we innovate and as we become successful, if we become successful, we start to add a hierarchy. Now, people need hierarchies. I don't want to have anyone in this call or this webinar hear that hierarchy is somehow bad. Hierarchies exist as a fundamental cognitive unit inside the human brain. It's part of how we chunk information. It's part of how we chunk structure. So what happens, though, as we build that hierarchy to create execution capabilities, it starts to take over. And it smashes our network and our customer centricity to bits. In fact, everyone likes that animation so much, myself included, that I'm going to go ahead and play it again, because I want you to see what happens when that hierarchy takes over. Goodbye, innovation. We lost customer centricity. What we need to do, and this is from Cotter's work, is we don't need to throw out the hierarchy, but we need something that is going to take the best of both worlds. How do I take that hierarchy, which gives me execution capabilities, but how do I also retain customer centricity and the network effect? We believe that that dual operating system that blends efficiency and stability with innovation is in fact the value stream network. Now, of course, I work for Scaled Agile. I am a member of the framework team, and I get to the great joy of working on the framework. So of course, I'm going to present the Scaled Agile perspective of value streams. But I also want to highlight that I don't think Scaled Agile is the only company talking about value streams. I think the entire industry in the software industry is starting to realize that value streams cross hierarchies. They blend teams and agile teams of teams together. They enable the functional hierarchy to do what it does, but that network and that value stream structure, it enables it to be successful. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the ways in which we can blend design thinking, customer centricity, and our value stream structure to get the best of both worlds, to get the best of innovation and the best of value stream thinking. Now, this is what we lovingly call the big picture. And it is a big picture because when you're doing Agile at scale, there's a lot of things that you need. I know that some people say, well, you know, we're Agilists, we don't need roadmaps. Well, you kind of do, because both your customers and your employees have a right to know kind of where you think you're headed. Some people say, oh, we're Agile, we don't need budgets. Well, at the end of the day, I like my salary, and I suspect you might like your salary too. And so having an organization managing a budget in some reasonably responsible manner so that we can pay our employees, that we can provide the benefits that we're seeking, that seems kind of important to me. Making sure that we've got people who are committed to understanding the needs of the business, but also customer centricity. That seems kind of important to me too. So while this looks like a lot of stuff, if you look at it in isolation, you kind of go, yeah, these are all things that are important for Agile at scale. Now, what we want to do is we want to focus on solutions, not process. And I know when you look at this picture, you see a lot of what looks like process, but in reality, when I work on this, I talk about right here, we've got customer centricity, and right here, we've got the solution and the solution context. And our job is to get those things through that pipeline so that we can deliver solutions, innovative and reliably and scalably to our customers. Now, it means that the entire organization is engaged, not just engineering, but over time, and we've known this for a while, right? We've known that the more your organization adopts Agile behaviors, the more it moves beyond just technical teams, but marketing changes how it works, sales changes how it works, even finance and human resources, they all start to change when we're all focused on this Agile notion of how do we deliver value. Now, we're pretty proud of our relationship with Mick, and he's even noted the importance of SAFe and helping organizations make this shift from a project focus to a product focus. Now, to look at this shift, to really look at what it entails, we've got to look at not, as I said, not just development, but we've got to look at finance and how we structure people. What is marketing doing? How does legal get involved? How do operations get involved? One of the interesting things that's occurring right now in the legal community is we are realizing that the big tech giants, especially the social media companies, have a very significant influence on over our lives. And we might need to start looking at some regulations, because without regulations, they appear to be making choices that may not be in the best interest of our societies. Now, let's talk about how we're going to get to business agility. Well, these are the centered pieces for us at Scaled Agile. It starts with customer centricity, and we look at three different areas. On the execution side, we've got team and technical agility, which focuses on the individual Agile team and teams of Agile teams organized as Agile release trains or solution trains. Agile product delivery focuses on making sure that the solutions we're building are desirable, viable, feasible, and sustainable. Enterprise solution delivery builds on both of these two core elements for the largest physical, cyber physical systems that we're creating. Now, over on the strategy side, we need to have lean portfolio management engaged so that we know that our strategy and our intentions are supported by the right economic models. We also need organizational agility. You know, Agile isn't about centralizing information in one spot or saying, you know, oh, the CEO is the smartest person in the room, because that's not what we intend. We have to make sure our entire organization is staffed with lean thinking people and they understand how operations work. Finally, the foundation. We need a continuous learning culture. My closest friends, including Laura and Jason, they will tell you truthfully that I read like a freak. I read 5 business magazines every month, and I try to read 1 or 2 books every month. Mark Cuban, the celebrated entrepreneur. If you don't know who he is, he's a billionaire, and he talks about how he makes investments of reading up to 2 hours a day, sometimes even more. So this notion of continuous learning, of relentless improvement, of asking yourself, how are we doing and what can we do better, is critical, a foundational element. And lastly, it's the leaders themselves. How do we model a growth mindset? How do we model our behavior so that we're leading by example? And how do we lead that change? All of these elements are baked into what we call the 7 competencies of business agility. Now, each of those competencies is associated with a ability in the framework to assess or measure how well your organization is doing in a given competency. And then we actually provide guidance at scaledagile.com based on your measurements, how you can grow or improve your skill within one of these areas. Now, I'm going to talk about the 2 areas where I am proud to be the steward of in terms of the framework team. The framework team is a group of people who kind of work with Dean as our chief methodologist. I'm talking a little fast, so my words are stumbling. Let me try again. Dean is our chief methodologist, and he is supported by a tight-knit team of people who help, you know, steward the overall framework. And one of the areas in which I'm a steward is Agile product delivery. So I'm going to talk about that. This is making sure we're building the right solutions for the right customers at the right time, making sure they're viable, sustainable, feasible, and desirable. Now, to do that, we have 3 dimensions. The first dimension is the customer centricity and design thinking dimension. The second is a very development-centric dimension, which is developing on cadence. All Agile methods have a cadence. And I think most Agile methods are now in a 2-week to 3-week cadence. The original version of Scrum had a 1-month cadence, which is fine. And if you're working on a 1-month cadence, no problem. My experience in both leading teams and in working with teams is that the organizations that around the world tend to have adopted a 2-week cadence. Now, this is developer-centric, and what I mean by that is that people need to know what their cadence is because they need to be able to do things like plan their vacation, or they need to know when the daily stand-up is so that they can arrange when they're getting their kids to and from school or whatever life thing they need. However, we separate the development cadence from the release cadence, and we want to release on demand. And what we mean by releasing on demand at Scaled Agile is that when we have something of value, we want to drive it through the continuous delivery pipeline so that we can get that value to our customers as rapidly as we can. Now, to do that, we have several stages of the pipeline, and that includes things like the development operations and driving through the pipeline. Now, customer centricity and design thinking, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about this area right here. In terms of customer centricity and design thinking, we use and we advocate the double diamond approach, which is first, understanding and separating the problem space from the solution space. We want to understand the problem. Who are we solving the problem for? What are their needs? From there, we want to design the right solution. Now, there's a whole set of tools in SAFe that help this be done. And I want to point out that I don't feel that SAFe invented really any of these tools. These tools have existed in other areas. We're blending some of them, but we're blending them in a very precise way. Now, for those of you on the phone call who are imbued in design thinking, you'll notice that the desirable, viable, and feasible is part of the canon of design thinking. But what we add in SAFe, because we have this notion of a value stream, a long-lived commitment to a solution, is sustainable. And sustainability is where we start to really look at the economics. We have many, many ideas that were really good, but failed because they were not economically sustainable over time. So part of the job in the product management function in SAFe is to make sure that we're not just like taking orders from our customer about what features to build, but we're actually creating something that's sustainable. Now, to the other area which I want to focus on, and I mentioned it briefly, but I want to focus on it now, is the DevOps and continuous delivery pipeline. SAFe is a framework for building, software-based or cyber-physical systems. It's not really a framework designed for creating, I would say, fine art like sculpture or fine music like a symphony. So when we go back to our world, right, we want to look at DevOps and the continuous delivery pipeline, where we can start to continually automate and change the way that we're working so that we can be driving value to our customers when it's ready. We can release on demand. I'll give you an example. SAFe acquired Contenio, which is the company I was the CEO of last year. And our Weave platform has now been released as SAFe Collaborate. We did a major release on Saturday morning. And between now and Saturday, based on our active continuous delivery pipeline, we've already done 7 more updates to our software seamlessly and without our customers even knowing about it. And so one of the things that you'll find is that when I go back to this notion of releasing on demand, I'm continually releasing value. Now, there are times from a marketing and a sales standpoint where you do want to make a distinction between what you can see in this picture of the smaller box and the bigger box. There are times where the bigger box from a marketing perspective and from a communication perspective needs to be differentiated. One example that a lot of companies refer to is the notion of GDPR compliance from Europe. Well, GDPR compliance could be released as a small box, but for most companies, it was associated with a press release, some communication, some sales interaction, and some updates. So we at Scaled Agile, we want to release on demand, but that doesn't mean we are throwing away the value of distinguishing the kind of release that you're making. Because sometimes those bigger boxes deserve sales and marketing support and customer service and customer notification. Now, I've talked a little bit about Agile release trains, and I think it's important to make sure that we ground ourselves on what an Agile release train is. Agile is a method for scaling software development, right? So if you're a pure startup, SAFe may be a little heavy for you, right? If you've only got one team and you're out there doing prototyping, it's not entirely clear that you're going to be needing all of the infrastructure provided by SAFe. But if you're a bank and you've got, say, operations in lending for mortgages or credit cards or core banking services like checking and savings accounts, and you're a sizable bank, you're going to have more than one team. You might have a few thousand developers. One of my clients before the acquisition was a Verifone. Verifone makes those physical payment terminals that many organizations use when they're swiping their credit card. So you go to a store and you swipe your credit card, well, there's a Verifone terminal. Well, that's a $2 billion plus company with almost 2,000 developers in 40 locations around the world. So we need to have the notion of a virtual organization, a team of teams that are aligned on a common purpose. Now notice that there's a single backlog. One of the things that I know Jason on the call has really been pushing these kinds of thinking for a very long time is this notion of you got to have a single backlog for your organization to be successful. So we want to align all of these teams on a common mission, a single program backlog, so that we can drive value to that customer. Now, I also want to look at lean portfolio management because, again, that's the part of the framework in which I'm a steward. So I am working on lean portfolio management and agile product delivery. That's where I spend my days, if you will. Now, here we want to look at how do we make sure that we are allocating the right funds into the right areas so that we can make sure that we're sustainably delivering our solutions to our customers, but we're also creating an economic return for our company. Now there's three competencies in, three dimensions to the lean portfolio management competency. There's strategy and investment funding. And notice here that we include enterprise executives and business owners. Here's kind of the highest level of strategy setting within the organization. Then there's our operations, our ongoing operations with our APMO or our LACE, which is the Lean Agile Center of Excellence, and then integrating and working with the Scrum Masters and what we call a release train engineer, which is kind of the Scrum Master of a very large set of teams. And then finally, we have lean governance, things like budgeting and interacting with how we're doing, compliance, making sure that we're in the right investment areas. Now, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on strategy and investment funding because that's kind of where the money meets the road. And here we're looking at how do we connect our portfolio to the overall strategy? How do we take those solution roadmaps and integrate them to make sure that we're driving towards a coherent vision and that the roadmap of roadmaps, the portfolio roadmap, is understanding the solution roadmaps. We're also looking at portfolio flow. One of the challenges that we have found is that it's easy in Agile to starve innovation without realizing it because Agile tends to optimize for things that can get done in an iteration or things that can get done in a sprint. And if you optimize for things that can get done in an iteration or a sprint, you tend to put the company at risk for starving itself for the big innovations that change the needle. We know that customers want big things and development teams often want small things because, again, they're working in sprints. So what we're looking at the portfolio level is making sure that there's a flow, not of features, but of actual significant investments that are then realized through features so that we can really move the needle for our customers. Now, the most important change is that we fund a value stream and not a project. What happens is and there's so many benefits to value streams and moving from project to product thinking. And I know you can read them here, right? We've got no resource assignments and things like that. But I think one of the more important things to realize about value stream funding is that, and I'm just going to draw it on this screen. Here's your developer, right? So here's your developer, Ming or Satish or Sudesh or Larry. Now, Larry is going to have two kinds of knowledge. There's technical knowledge, like how do I write code in Python, or how do I deploy code in Amazon? Or how do I work in my continuous delivery pipeline? And that developer is also going to have domain knowledge. I'm working in the domain of trucking and I learn about how trucking works. I'm working in the domain of finance and I learn how finance works. I work for United Technology Aerospace Systems, which makes the landing gear subassembly for airplanes. And I learn a lot about how airplanes work. Now, both forms of knowledge are needed to be successful. But what we now have learned is that when we organize developers in a value stream, and those developers can consistently work in the same problem domain, their domain knowledge increases and their bug counts actually go down. And the reason their bug counts go down is because they understand the problem itself more thoroughly. And that more thorough problem understanding enables them to create more effective solutions. I am done. And Laura and Jason and I really wanted this to be about a half-hour overview, because what our experience is that webinars are a little bit more fun when we can field questions and field thoughts from the audience. And so I'm gonna stop sharing and I'm gonna engage Laura and Jason in our conversation now. And first I'm gonna say thank you again, but I also wanna just get the conversation going. I know that we've got some chats and some Q&A, so Jason and Laura, let's do it together.
Yeah, I'm gonna, let Jason have a lot of time here as well, because I know that he and you both have a lot of kind of experience and opinions and insights in these areas. But I think one question that was posed might be a good place to kick this off, which is, we hear this objective, right, of moving from project to product. And it's definitely, a mindset, it's a way of operating, it's a way of thinking. What, Luke or Jason, can either one of you kind of give an example of what, if you were to walk into an organization and kind of say, oh yeah, they have a project mindset and they do have a goal of moving to a product-centric organization, how can you tell the difference? What does it look like if a company is a project-centric organization, and how do they know that they're making the right modifications or changes so that now they feel and operate as a product organization?
Well, when I go in and look at the portfolio management organization, you can immediately see how they define portfolio. So when Luke was going through his LPM slides, it's clear that the portfolio is a combination of products. And the products have different budget profiles and different revenue profiles. When you walk into a PMO and it's a project portfolio management office, you know immediately, because you're looking at project codes and matrices of projects and people as opposed to products and teams. So I think the currency shifts in a product organization where you're thinking about the allocation of teams to products and value streams as opposed to individuals to projects. And that's where you wind up with wacky time allocations of people that causes all sorts of multitasking of context switching, where I'm on project A 50% at a time, project B 25% at a time, and sometimes project C 30% of my time. And the poor individuals left to figure out, how am I supposed to allocate my day? Is it like mornings on project A and I split my afternoons, and it's all sorts of craziness. And that's how you kind of know right away.
Yeah, I wanna actually pile on what Jason said, because he mentioned, this notion of the portfolio structure, and just to build on what Jason said, a project portfolio will have the organization talking about things like percent complete, or what phase of your project are you in. And you'll see one organization I worked with, it was just really horrific. They had this thing called the back to green meeting. And every project had a little stoplight, red, yellow, green. And Jason's laughing, right? Because he's seen this too. And you would go into this meeting, and if your project was red, you would basically, be told, well, you're failing unless you get to green. So of course, everyone's project was always green because no one wants to fail publicly. And then everything is a lie in terms of its metric. So what you see is in the measurements in that portfolio, Laura, is you'll see things like a list of projects with % complete in red, yellow, green. In a more product portfolio, you're going to see usually two things that are very different. First, your measurements, your KPIs are things like if it's a company that's selling products, it's going to be things like revenue and profit margin and net promoter score, and you're going to see the work being conducted more as a lean startup model of you're going to see things like what experiments are we running, what investments are we making in improving our product, and if the experiment doesn't work, it's like, hey, we made an investment and we did some learning, as opposed to your project is red and it's failing. So I think Jason's really right about the structure of the portfolio really does determine the degree to which you can kind of see these notions of project to product. I will say one thing though. One thing that people go too far on is they say when we're moving towards value streams and when we're moving to a product centricity, they'll say things like people never change a value stream or the organization structure never changes. Well, that's going too far, right? Because organizations do, in a sense, flex over time their solutions and people do move. I think the only other thing I would add to Jason about when you talked about people is I see that project organizations tend to move individuals and product organizations tend to think of the organizational unit as the team itself. So if they're gonna move someone, they don't move a single person, they tend to move the entire team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I actually appreciate that. I think it's helpful to kind of really take a look at, okay, well, what at the biggest level, what's happening that's different, right, between the two mindsets and two organizations. Well, that actually gets into another two questions that I think I can kind of combine together that I'd like you two to talk about a little bit. One of them is just when people are implementing SAFe, how often is portfolio SAFe either required or implemented or used? And I actually think that ties into a question that Scott asked as well, which is, so if you are on the portfolio team, how do you kind of balance the need to be creating and supporting epics that are kind of all about creating direct value, and then those epics that are about supporting the ability to create value, right? So there's two kinds of epics, I guess, or maybe even more than that, that the portfolio team is considering. And I kind of feel like, well, those two questions are related. In some ways, all companies have those dynamics to consider, right? I mean, Luke, when you and I were working at Contenio together, we were a team of, 10 people, and we still had to make portfolio level decisions, right? So yeah, maybe you could talk about both of those at the same time.
Yeah, I'm gonna start, and I'll let Jason fill in. When I'm gonna share my screen again. When we're talking about portfolio SAFe, right? First, the thing is, people confuse SAFe because they're always like, oh, SAFe is so big, and they're always looking at the full configuration. Well, in reality, a lot of companies really don't need the large solution, to be really blunt. And you shouldn't start with the large solution of SAFe. I have found that, essential SAFe really gets you into your team practices, but notice it's missing the portfolio. And so to Laura's point, even though we were at Contenio, a small company of 10 people, in practice, we did portfolio SAFe because we had an essential SAFe structure for our development, but Laura and Dan and I, as the leaders of the company, we needed to make portfolio decisions. Now, there's this really interesting tension that occurs, and I don't know how to explain it other than by using my own family as an example. People sometimes say that when you have portfolios in Agile, you're introducing command and control. And I think that that's a really unfair way to think about it. So let me give you a completely different mental model. My wife, Jenna, and I are both runners. And we run pretty frequently. If I went out and bought a new pair of running shoes, Jenna wouldn't even notice or wouldn't even care. And if she did, she'd basically say something like, oh, I see you got a new pair of shoes. Did you try a new brand or did you try a new thing? Because sometimes we'll try different shoes to see if we like them more. But there's no need for, in a sense, a conversation about what I did, because it's just kind of expected to be done that way. That's the decentralization of control, right? I'm just kind of managing something that I'm going to go do. Now, Jenna and I also have 4 kids, and they're all teenagers, and we have a 12-year-old minivan that we bought when the kids were young, and it's been through a lot of miles and a lot of pounding. If I actually showed you a photo of it, you'd see dents and dings and scratches, and one hubcap is gone. It looks like a 12-year-old car, minivan that had 4 teenagers grow up in it. And so now Jenna and I are talking about, building out a new one, not building out, but buying a new minivan. From a portfolio of the Hohmann family standpoint, we are planning a big expenditure. Now, how do you think Jenna would feel? And we've agreed, we're going to spend money, and we're going to wait until the car breaks down. So we're going to keep it as long as we can, but we're not going to repair it anymore because it doesn't make economic sense. Now, how do you think Jenna would feel if I just went out and bought a new minivan and I drove it home? I'm pretty convinced that it's not going to be like those commercials you see on TV during Christmas by Lexus, where, the person wraps up a new car in a red bow and everyone's all smiling and happy. I'm pretty sure Jenna would say, hey, what did you do? You bought a new car and you didn't have a conversation with me. Why? Well, that's what the purpose of lean portfolio management is. The purpose of an epic is not to inhibit innovation. It's to look at abundance. It's to look at a set of good ideas that exist. Because trust me, Jenna and I believe that we have a lot of good ideas about how we could improve our house or our family or whatever. And so we want to have a conversation, including, now that our kids are older, our kids at times, because we want to train them in these techniques too. So the purpose of an epic in SAFE is to promote a healthy conversation between people who should want to talk to each other, who should want to collaborate, so that we can work together and make the best choices. So that's, Laura, that's to me the best way for explaining how I think about the portfolio function and how I think about epics in these big expenditures.
Yeah, Jason, I mean, you probably have some feelings on that too, but that kind of gets at one of the questions that one of our attendees posted to our, just to the panelists. Tony was talking about, well, how do you help leaders see that SAFE just isn't something around the execution side of things, that it actually has something for the leadership? And I think what Luke said probably applies exactly to that question.
Well, yeah, I think it's important to then feather in this question of the portfolio level evaluation of the epics and the opportunities, because there's I think an artificial line between the portfolio and program layer, because the customer centricity and design thinking sit below the portfolio, yet the double diamond Luke showed actually is part of the portfolio layer. So there's almost this iterative looping between the two, so that if we're thinking about new problems and market opportunities and evaluation of the problem to determine a fit, to then get to solutions, it almost needs to be a loop back up as we discover new opportunities, that there's some evaluation of, okay, should we now go do this? And that to me was always the essence of the portfolio Kanban, to actually evaluate all these different choices. I can attack a new market, I can grow revenue. As one question that I want to feather in is, well, I've also got indirect benefits. I've got to think about how I'm enhancing my infrastructure and my architecture, and that's an investment that's not immediately going to lead to revenue. All of that's going through the portfolio Kanban. So if I'm thinking about, well, I've got my pilot, I've got the first release train running, and opportunities for 25 more, this isn't no longer just about proving that I can deliver with this pipeline. How did I then integrate into the business? I think it's starting to raise the questions within the organization of how can we slowly start reorienting from just a delivery approach to this is a dynamic business opportunity for us to leverage to make better choices and decisions. So I think it's one small step. It's often within a business unit. That's what I typically see is there's one business unit that sort of leads the way and everyone else is sort of watching to say, wow, that seems to be working. How do we start getting that good stuff happening in our organization? And literally, that's what I saw, because when I was kidding around saying, you know, last time I looked at SAFe as an SBC was 2.5, that happened. One area experimented with SAFe and suddenly it took off and we had release trains popping up everywhere. A 50,000 person organization is sort of what happens, sort of promulgates based on success being reinforced by other organizations within the company.
So Laura, I'm looking at, I figured out how to get to the chats and the Q&A and stuff. I want to knock off the Joel Bancroft-Connors question because first, he's known for, you know, his guerrilla blog, which always is, you know, Joel being Joel, which is let's pick the hardest thing to talk about it and bring it up, you know, in conversation at the dinner party. You're like, really, Joel? Always being awkward? Okay. But this is the awkward, tough question in the Agile community, right? We need velocity and we need structures about knowing how we're doing, but is that really relevant to the portfolio and doesn't scale? So I'm going to share something that is a part of the Scaled Agile Lean Portfolio Management course. And in the course, and I'm just finishing a major rewrite of the course. So if you look at the course itself, one of the things that we talk about in the new rewrite is the safe lean startup cycle. And if I look at this, right, what happens is the portfolio says, you know, in the portfolio Kanban, we've got an epic, business or enabler epic, and it's got enough information that we're going to go ahead and say, yes, we want to make investments in the MVP, and we're going to run many experiments in the construction of that MVP. So the first thing I want to remind people is that when in safe land, we say the epic, the team has been allocated $250,000 to do experiments. It doesn't mean we're expecting them to spend all of that money or it's only one experiment. We're saying you can spend up to $250,000, and we're very happy with that because we want to invest in innovation, but we want you to do a lot of experiments. Now the question is, we do have some understanding about how long it's going to take, but we all know we don't know exactly how long it's going to take. So when we're done with our MVP and our experiments, assuming that the hypothesis is proven, then the epic, that investment moves into persevere. And when it moves into persevere, that means it's moving into the program Kanban or the local control. Now the question of when will you be done doesn't matter anymore, because when you're done is when the WSGIF says it's no longer an economically viable thing for the program level to invest in. So in SAFe, we're going to take that concept and we're going to decentralize that control. Now the question then becomes, well, when is it done from the perspective of the portfolio? And there's kind of a tricky answer here, but it's really simple and it's really true. It's when it's no longer a portfolio concern. You know, GDPR compliance is no longer a portfolio concern once the team has reduced the risk and demonstrated that they can get it done. Now, or they've released it. So in SAFe, we literally don't try to answer the question of when you will be done, because that lends itself or trends towards project thinking. And what we want to do is we want to understand our investments, but eventually if that's going to continue, we're going to decentralize that, and we're going to put that into the hands and the control of the program level.
Well, then at the program level, you got the same issue though, right, Luke? So when we talk about when we're going to be done, I think the question then becomes done with what? So I think the different question is, what do you expect in the next release? And at what point can there be some indication that the likelihood of the package from the release train is ready for a launch plan? Well, so we always think about, backwards planning from what is my longest lead time activity to actually do a launch. And I think this is going to your Contenio story. We're doing this continuous delivery of enhancements, fixes. They're transparent to the customer. However, at some point, there will be a big release. There's going to be a big announcement. There's a launch plan. There's a marketing investment. That, I think, is a different question, which I think that's the one that I think that may want to be explored a little bit for this audience is, how does SAFE look at the conversation about, we expect this to be in the release, and now we're ready to prepare to make the announcement and make the big push to realize our investment returns?
Yeah, I don't think SAFE does anything materially different than other techniques, right? We have PI planning boundaries, PI for the program increment, or sometimes I call it the planning increment as opposed to a program increment, because it just represents a time box of multiple iterations. From that perspective, I don't think there's a lot of distinctions or differences between just the empiricism of all Agile, which is, I want to promote these features or these capabilities. How are we doing, and am I on track? I think there is one difference though, and this is really subtle, and it actually is relevant given the crisis that every organization just went through with COVID, and that's the notion of in SAFE, when you are done with your PI planning, you walked into the room with your top 10 features, but you walked out of the room with agreed upon objectives. And the reason we walk into the room with features is because a product manager does need to manage the backlog, and teams do need to be able to say, I'm doing concrete work. But after I'm done planning that work, we still know that things might go wrong or things can change. So we have objectives. Now, those objectives get matched into what SAFE calls the program predictability measure, which is how are you reasonably capable of predicting your future? And I got to tell everyone on the call, when COVID hit, our program predictability score went to basically kablooey. It blew up because everything changed with COVID and lockdown. We were a training company that was making a lot of revenue from in-person training. Well, you suddenly cancel all in-person classes. That's a pretty big change. So our program predictability score actually tanked, and it was a proof that what we thought we would be able to do suddenly radically changed. And now we could reset and say, okay, we still have the same business objective, but we've got to go about achieving it in a radically different way. So Jason, I don't think that we have a lot of differences there in the sense that we're going to walk into PI planning with features. We're going to walk out with objectives, but during PI planning, we're going to continue to give to the marketing and sales teams status updates and capability updates about where we are. Yeah,
which I think the analogy I always think about from the Scrum review would be the program increment system demonstrations, where people are actually seeing and interacting with the product that is on the release train, providing the feedback loop to then have those conversations about, okay, where are we on delivery into our market window?
Right. I'm going to do a shout out to my really good friend, Scott Selhorst. And if you're in the product management community, you should really read his writing at Tyner Blaine, his blog Tyner Blaine, because it's brilliant. But Scott, I'm going to need a little bit more help about balancing the build to learn versus build to earn. I know that that's part of the mantra in the Agile community and part of the lean startup community and part of the design thinking is, am I building to learn or am I building to earn? If I were to frame that in the perspective of SAFE, I would say, getting a fresh picture on the lean startup, I am building to learn when I am in my experiments and evaluating and structuring my MVP. However, once my hypothesis is proven and I have made the decision that it is in fact economically desirable to persevere, I am building to earn. So if I had to frame the build to learn and build to earn model in the safe lean startup cycle, it's when I'm doing those experiments and understanding my MVP and testing my hypotheses that I'm building to learn. And when I've got my hypothesis proven, and assuming that that hypothesis demonstrates that there is a viable economics, well, then I'm going to go ahead and build to earn. And in SAFE, you also asked, Scott, about a direct value stream versus an enabling value stream. We don't really have the concept of an enabling value stream in SAFE. What we do have is a concept of a system team or an internal supplier. So an internal supplier could be loosely equated to an enabling value stream. And that internal supplier or that system team does provide services to those other value streams that exist. Laura, do we have time for one more?
Yep, we have time for one more question. Jason, I'm going to try to combine a couple of them in here, but I think part of the questions that I'm seeing have to do with like leadership mindset and making the transition to exploring product-oriented portfolio management ways of running a business. What do you have any kind of ending words of wisdom there, or ways of answering a couple of these questions?
Yeah, well, we have another really dear friend and colleague on the call with us, Greg Hutchins from Paris, a really brilliant Agile consultant. And Greg points out, decision-making techniques. And of course, that's easy for Greg to ask because he's an expert at them. But Greg, I'm going to go to participatory budgeting. If you look at SAFE, as far as I know in terms of methods, SAFE is the only method that explicitly includes as a decision-making technique in lean budgeting the notion of using participatory budgeting to help organizations make these decisions. And that participatory budgeting process is the most collaborative process that we know of to help people make choices about how they want to invest money. It's exactly what I talked about with Jenna and me. We're going to have a participatory budgeting session, her and me, talking about a shared resource, the money we've allocated to get a new car. Actually, we'll probably not get a new one. We'll get a used one, but it doesn't matter. We're still going to have a conversation about it. All participatory budgeting does is it extends that at scale to include more leaders and more discussions. And I've done participatory budgeting for over a decade now at organizations of all shapes and sizes and with all dollar amounts. And I consistently find that it is the single best approach to help leaders learn how to collaborate and learn how to make decisions together.
Yeah, and Jason, you and I just worked on a blog post that referenced participatory budgeting as a decision-making framework. So I think the point, Luke, that you were making that I like is it's not just a tool for LPM safe, portfolio discussions. It is a tool that is applied to any time you have more opportunity than you have resources.
Or when you've got to make a cut. I mean, I just gave a talk at the Scaled Agile Summit about making a budget cut, humanely budget cutting in the time of COVID. How do I humanely cut when I've got to cut my budget to survive in my company? Well, one humane way is to engage people in that choice and see how they engage in that process. It's tough. It's not easy. It's more fun to grow than to cut, but sometimes you got to cut. And participatory budgeting is also a technique that can be used when you've got to cut. Well, we are about at the end of our time, but one of the things that we all
extend to everybody on the call. And I know Jason and I will take up the cause here. So questions that we did not get answered, we will huddle together after this and put together some answers in our follow-up email that we'll be sending out to everyone that'll include the recording. So if you have other ones, put them in there. And if you want to let us know who you are, then we can also get in touch with you individually and have a deeper discussion. I know some of the questions we didn't get to are complex and big and important, and they deserve an answer. And we, Jason and I would both be happy to get on the phone with an individual after sometime later this week and have a deeper discussion about those. So we'll be sharing the recording. And any other parting words from my two favorite panelists here before we let people get back to their day?
As long as I am more favored than Jason, I'm happy. No, I think, Laura, we should also let people know that we'll be happy to collect all the chats and all the questions and give them a formal email reply. But there's some great stuff, and I see some real friends. I love that Lisa Hammond added, I've run participatory budgeting for the C-suite and it was overwhelmingly successful. Yes, it is. Oh, Gervais Johnson is here. Yes, and fabulous. Lots of friends, really fun to see everyone, Tony and Greg and everyone. Laura, I just think that we need another webinar now.
Well, this is technically number 2. See, number 1, for those of you who don't know, we had major technical flame out last week. So apologies to everyone who tried to be here last week. So this is sort of number 2, but not really. But yeah, I think we do. We need to have another one of these for sure.
Jason, you're supposed to close with like the most brilliant thing you've ever said in your entire life.
The most brilliant thing is, Luke, I appreciate you for a tremendous presentation. So thank you. It's always very well executed and clear and informative. So thank you.
Well, thanks for spending time with me, you two. I wish we were together in the room. I wish everyone in this call was just at my house for a barbecue. So I wish.
Someday, Luke, we'll all be there knocking on your front door.
Go tell Jenna I said that.
All right. Well, everyone, get back to your day. Thank you very much. And we'll be in touch within a couple of days with all of our responses.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.